the day my son told me I was no longer welcome at my grandchildren's birthday parties, I felt something inside me finally break. For 3 years, Rebecca had been systematically cutting me out of their lives, and Thomas had stood by and let it happen. It took me losing access to my own grandchildren to realize I'd spent 68 years of my life putting everyone else first. So when I discovered I was the anonymous owner of the Victorian home they'd been desperately trying to buy, I didn't say a word. I just signed the papers transferring ownership to myself and waited for them to find out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My son Thomas had always been the sensitive one of my 3 children. Even as a little boy, he'd fall in love too easily, with stray cats, with adventure stories, with grand ideas that rarely materialized. When he brought Rebecca home 6 years ago, I recognized the familiar pattern. Thomas, swept away by her confidence and beauty, didn't notice the calculating look in her eyes when she surveyed our family home, or the way she subtly directed his choices while making him think they were his own. I kept my concerns to myself. After 42 years of marriage to my late husband Edward, I'd learned when to speak and when to observe quietly. The wedding was lavish beyond what Thomas could afford, Rebecca's dream ceremony that left them starting marriage with crushing debt. I offered to help, but Rebecca declined, saying they wanted to build their life on their own terms. Later, I learned she had accepted substantial financial help from her own parents. It was the first of many small rejections that would grow into something more insidious. When my first grandchild Emma was born 4 years ago, everything changed. I'd expected to be there for the birth, as I had been for my daughter Sarah's children, but Rebecca's mother was the only one permitted in the delivery room. Rebecca's just more comfortable with her own mother, Thomas explained apologetically, over the phone. I swallowed my disappointment and arrived at the hospital the next day with a handmade blanket I'd spent months knitting. Rebecca barely acknowledged my gift. "Oh, we already have so many blankets," she said, setting it aside without really looking at it. "Mom brought the one from my own christening, so we'll probably use that." I noticed Thomas glancing at me with that same apologetic look, but he said nothing. That blanket I'd poured my heart into disappeared, and I never saw Emma wrapped in it. Still, I tried. Every Sunday, I'd bring homemade meals to help them through the exhausting early weeks of parenthood. Rebecca would accept them with a tight smile, but once, arriving earlier than expected, I found her scraping an entire casserole into the garbage disposal. "Oh, Margaret," she said, not even bothering to look embarrassed. "Emma has some sensitivities, and the doctor thinks my diet might be affecting my milk. We're avoiding dairy now." The casserole had no dairy, but I didn't point this out. When little James was born 2 years later, I wasn't even notified until he was 3 days old. "We wanted some private time," Rebecca explained during my brief supervised visit. I noticed how she hovered when I held him, as if I might somehow damage this tiny person who shared my blood. I'd raised 3 children of my own and helped with 4 other grandchildren, but in Rebecca's eyes, I was incompetent. The visits became more restricted, the excuses more elaborate. The children had schedules that couldn't be disturbed. They were going through a stranger anxiety phase. Rebecca was concerned about too many visitors during cold and flu season, which somehow stretched across all seasons for me, though not for her family or friends. Thomas, caught between his wife and his mother, chose the path of least resistance. Our once close relationship dwindled to brief phone calls where he sounded perpetually distracted, and quick visits without Rebecca or the children. "She's just protective," he'd say. "It's not personal." But it was personal. Every holiday, I'd watch as Rebecca posted photos on social media of the children surrounded by her family. Every milestone, first steps, first words, first day of preschool, I'd learn about through Facebook rather than from my own son. The children were growing up without knowing me, and Rebecca was making sure of it. The breaking point came last month. Emma was turning 4, and I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gift. A dollhouse, handcrafted by a local artisan, with tiny furniture I'd carefully selected piece by piece. I called Thomas to confirm the party details. "About that, Mom," he began, his voice strained. "Rebecca thinks it might be better if you skip this one." "Skip Emma's birthday?" I repeated, sure I'd misheard. "It's just, there are some issues with space, and Rebecca's planned activities for the kids that are pretty structured and—" "Thomas," I interrupted, "please don't lie to me. What's the real reason?" The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "Rebecca thinks you undermine her parenting," he finally admitted. "She says you give the kids too many sweets and ignore her rules about screen time. And there was that comment you made about Emma's hair needing a trim. That was months ago, and I only mentioned it once. I know, Mom, but Rebecca feels judged and she doesn't want that energy at the party." "Energy," I repeated flatly. See? "You can come by the next day. Bring your gift then," he offered lamely. "And will Rebecca be home then?" Another silence. That's what I thought. I hung up before he could hear the break in my voice. I spent that evening going through old photo albums, tracing Thomas's childhood with my fingertips. The gap-toothed boy who'd brought me dandelion bouquets. The teenager who'd confided his dreams while we baked cookies together. The young man who'd wept on my shoulder after his first heartbreak. How had that son become this stranger who couldn't stand up for me, for his children's grandmother? The next morning, my phone pinged with a notification from the neighborhood social media group. Rebecca had posted asking if anyone knew the owner of 542 Maple Street, the Grand Victorian on the corner that had recently been listed for sale. "It's our dream house," she wrote. "We've submitted an offer but heard the owner is considering multiple bids. If anyone has connections or information, please message me." I stared at my phone, a strange feeling washing over me. 542 Maple Street. My heart began to race as I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked EJ Investments. Inside was the documentation for the property investments Edward and I had made over the years. Our little secret. We'd used a holding company name for privacy. His initials, not our surname. And there it was. 542 Maple Street, purchased 15 years, ago as a rental property, and managed through a property management company. The current tenants had given notice, and the management company had listed it without consulting me first, assuming I'd want to sell now that I was alone. My finger hovered over my phone, ready to call Thomas and tell him the incredible coincidence. But something stopped me. Would it matter to Rebecca that I owned her dream house? Would it suddenly make me worthy of being in my grandchildren's lives? The bitterness of that thought surprised me. Instead, I called my property manager and explained that I wanted to take the house off the market. "I've decided to move in myself," I told him, the plan forming as I spoke. It wasn't entirely impulsive. I'd been considering downsizing from my current home, which felt too large and full of echoes since Edward passed. The Victorian was smaller, but charming, with a garden that Edward had always particularly loved when we visited the tenants. "There have been several offers already," the manager informed me. "One couple is particularly persistent." "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "Please inform all parties that the owner has decided to occupy the property." That evening, my phone rang. Thomas, for the first time in weeks, initiating a call to me. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "You'll never believe." "What happened?" "The house? That perfect house we told you about on Maple Street. We lost it. The owner pulled it off the market completely. Rebecca is devastated." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while a plan crystallized in my mind. For years, I'd been the accommodating one, the mother and grandmother who accepted scraps of attention, who swallowed hurt rather than causing conflict. What had it gotten me? A son who couldn't stand up to his wife, grandchildren who barely knew me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A daughter-in-law who saw me as irrelevant at best, an obstacle at worst. That's a shame, I said. Finally. Real estate can be so unpredictable. Rebecca's convinced someone swooped in with a cash offer. She's been crying all day. This was the house, Mom. The one we've been dreaming about for years. Perfect neighborhood for the kids, walking distance to the best schools. The self-pity in his voice grated against something raw inside me. How many times had I cried alone after being excluded from my grandchildren's lives? Where was his concern then? I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice cooler than intended. I'm sure the right house will come along. I guess, he sighed. Anyway, Rebecca wanted me to ask if you're still planning to come by tomorrow with Emma's gift. I thought Rebecca didn't want me at your house. Not during the party, he clarified quickly. But afterward should be fine, as long as you don't stay too long. The kids will be tired. The casual cruelty of it, being granted a brief, grudging window of access to my own grandchildren, was the final straw. Actually, I've made other plans, I said. I'm meeting with a real estate agent. I'm thinking of moving. Moving? Thomas sounded genuinely surprised. But you love your house. You and Dad built it together. Things change, Thomas. People change. I paused, then added, I'll drop Emma's gift off on your porch tomorrow. Give her my love. After hanging up, I sat in Edward's old armchair, the one he'd spent countless evenings in, reading the newspaper while I knitted beside him. What would you do, Ed? I whispered to the empty room. I could almost hear his answer, that gentle rumble of a laugh followed by the advice he'd given me throughout our marriage. Follow your heart, Maggie, but use your head to get there. My heart ached for connection with my grandchildren, for the relationship with my son that had once been so close. But my head recognized that continuing as before, accepting crumbs of time, navigating Rebecca's arbitrary rules and restrictions, was slowly destroying me. So I made my decision. The next morning, I signed the papers to take ownership of 542 Maple Street. I'll move in next month, I told the property manager. And please, keep my ownership confidential for now. That same day, I dropped off Emma's gift as promised, leaving the carefully wrapped dollhouse on the front porch with a card expressing my love. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't try to catch a glimpse of my grandchildren through the windows. Instead, I drove to my sister Claire's house across town. Claire, 5 years my senior and blunt as ever, listened to the whole story over tea at her kitchen table. When I finished, she reached across and squeezed my hand. It's about time you stood up for yourself, Margaret, she said. I've watched you shrink smaller and smaller around that daughter-in-law of yours, and it's broken my heart. Edward wouldn't have stood for it, and neither should you. But the children, I said, my voice catching. I'm afraid of losing them completely. Honey, from where I'm sitting, Rebecca's already made sure that happened. The question is, what are you going to do to change it? What indeed? As I drove home, I passed by 542 Maple Street and slowed down. The Grand Old Victorian sat on its corner lot, mature trees shading its wraparound porch, late afternoon sunlight glinting off its bay windows. Soon, this would be my home. A fresh start, a new chapter. I thought about Rebecca's face when she discovered who actually owned her dream house. I thought about my son's reaction when he realized his mother wasn't the pushover he'd come to expect. But most of all, I thought about Emma and James, the grandchildren who deserved to know their grandmother, to hear stories about their father. As a boy, to learn family recipes and traditions that stretched back generations. For the first time in years, I felt something beyond hurt and resignation. I felt a flicker of power, of determination. Rebecca had controlled the narrative for too long. Now it was my turn to write the story. I pulled into my driveway and noticed Thomas's car parked at the curb. He sat on my front steps, the unwrapped dollhouse beside him, his expression troubled. "Emma loved it," he said as I approached. "She wanted to thank you herself. I told her I'd bring her by tomorrow, but Rebecca—" He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "Rebecca what?" I prompted, unlocking my front door and gesturing for him to follow me inside. "She says the dollhouse is too elaborate, that you're trying to buy Emma's affection. She wants me to return it." I set my purse down deliberately, taking a moment to control the anger rising inside me. When I turned to face my son, my voice was steady. "Thomas, I've made a decision. I won't be available tomorrow or any day after that until some things change. I'm tired of being treated like an inconvenience in my grandchildren's lives. I'm tired of watching you allow it." His face flushed. "That's not fair, Mom. I'm caught in the middle here." "No, Thomas, you put yourself in the middle. You're a grown man, a father yourself now. It's time you decided what kind of relationship you want your children to have with their grandmother, because I won't accept the scraps I've been given anymore." He stared at me, shock evident in his expression. I'd never spoken to him this way, never made demands or ultimatums. I'd always been the mother who understood, who compromised, who accommodated. Not anymore. "Take the dollhouse back to Emma," I said, moving toward the kitchen. "Tell her it's hers to keep, regardless of what Rebecca thinks. And when you're ready to have a real conversation about my place in your children's lives, you know where to find me." I paused, then added, "At least for the next month." "What do you mean?" "I'm moving," I said simply. "New house, new start." As Thomas left with the dollhouse, looking bewildered by this unfamiliar version of his mother, I felt a strange lightness. The pain was still there, the hurt of rejection, the fear of further estrangement. But alongside it was something new, the certainty that I was finally standing up for my own worth. And as for 542 Maple Street, I wasn't sure yet exactly how that piece would play out in this family drama. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding some cards of my own. The next morning, I woke before dawn. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, listening to the silence of my empty house, a silence that had once felt like loneliness, but now hummed with possibility. I'd made my decision, set boundaries with Thomas for the first time in his life, and now it was time to move forward. I called my lawyer, Judith, and asked her to meet me for an early breakfast. We'd been friends since our children attended the same elementary school, and she'd helped me navigate the legal complexities after Edward's death. Over coffee and omelets at a quiet corner table, I laid out my situation, watching her expression shift from concern to barely concealed delight. "So let me make sure I understand," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "You accidentally discovered you own the house your daughter-in-law is obsessed with. Your son and his wife have been keeping you from your grandchildren. And now you're planning to, what exactly? Move into this house and surprise them?" "Not exactly surprise them," I clarified. "I'm going to renovate it first, make it mine, and then, well, I haven't quite figured out that part yet." Judith leaned back, studying me with new appreciation. "Margaret Williams, I've known you for 30 years, and I've never seen this side of you. I like it." "I've never seen it either," I admitted, "but I'm tired of being pushed aside. I'm tired of my son not standing up for me. I'm just tired." I squared my shoulders, but not too tired to fight for my place in my grandchildren's lives. "Well, legally it's straightforward," Judith said. "The house is yours to do with as you please. As for grandparents' rights—" Her expression grew more serious. "That's murkier territory. Without evidence of unfit parenting, courts generally defer to parents' wishes about who has access to their children." "I'm not looking to take them to court," I said quickly. "That would only make things worse. I just want to—" I searched for the right words. "Reset the power balance. Rebecca sees me as insignificant, disposable. I want her to recognize that I matter. And you think owning her dream house will accomplish that? It's a start. I said with more confidence than I felt. After breakfast, I drove straight to 542 Maple Street with the keys the property manager had given me. Standing alone on the wide front porch, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I being petty? Manipulative? But then I remembered Emma's birthday party, Thomas's weak excuses, Rebecca's systematic campaign to erase me from their lives. No, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and fighting for relationships that mattered. The house was empty but full of echoes from the previous tenants, faint outlines where pictures had hung, slight indentations in the carpet from furniture. I wandered from room to room, trying to see it through Rebecca's eyes. The spacious kitchen with its bay window overlooking a garden that Edward had helped design years ago. The formal dining room with built-in china cabinets. The 4 bedrooms upstairs, one of which would make a perfect nursery for any future grandchildren. Standing in what would be my new bedroom, I realized I was crying, not from sadness, but from a strange mixture of determination and liberation. For decades, I'd defined myself as Edward's wife, as my children's mother, always accommodating, always putting others first. Now, at 68, I was finally putting myself first, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Mom, can we talk?" "Rebecca's upset about yesterday." I stared at those words, feeling a familiar tug of maternal guilt. In the past, I would have called immediately, ready to smooth things over, to accommodate Rebecca's feelings once again. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket unanswered and continued my tour of the house. By noon, I'd made a decision. I called a contractor who had done work for Edward and me years ago and arranged for him to meet me at the Victorian the following day. Then I called Clare. "I need your help," I told her. "I'm packing up my house and moving next month, and there's a lot to sort through." "About time," Clare said without hesitation. "I'll be there in an hour with boxes and wine." True to her word, Claire arrived armed with packing supplies and a bottle of Cabernet. As we began sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What exactly are you planning to do when Rebecca finds out you own her precious dream house?" I carefully wrapped a crystal vase that had been a wedding gift and placed it in a box before answering. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to see her face when she realizes. Part of me just wants my grandchildren back in my life, however that happens." Claire handed me another piece to wrap. "And what about Thomas? Have you spoken to him since yesterday?" He texted. I didn't answer. She raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." "A lot of firsts happening lately," I said with a small smile. We worked in companionable silence until Claire picked up a framed photo of Thomas's wedding day. Him beaming in his tuxedo, Rebecca radiant in white, Edward and I flanking them with proud smiles. "She wasn't always this way, you know," I said quietly. "When they first got engaged, she was different, warmer, more inclusive. Sometimes I wonder what changed." "Power changed," Claire said bluntly. She secured her position, had children, and realized Thomas would never stand up to her. So she stopped pretending. I took the frame from her, studying Rebecca's perfect smile. That's a harsh assessment. Am I wrong? After a pause, I placed the photo in a box labeled "Maybe." "No, you're not wrong, but I still don't understand why she's so determined to keep me away from the children. What threat could I possibly pose?" Claire sat on the edge of my bed, wine glass in hand. "Some women are territorial about their children. Maybe she's afraid they'll love you too much. Maybe she's jealous of your relationship with Thomas, however strained it is now. Or maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe what?" "Maybe she's just not a very nice person, Margaret. Not everyone has your capacity for kindness." That night, after Claire left, Thomas called again. This time, I answered. "Mom, what's going on?" He sounded equal parts concerned and irritated. You're moving? Just like that? Where? Why now? I sat in Edward's chair, feeling its familiar comfort. I've been thinking about downsizing for a while now. Since your father died, this house has felt too big, too full of memories. I've found a place that feels right for the next chapter of my life. But why didn't you talk to me about it first? I could have helped you look, made sure you weren't making a hasty decision. The patronizing tone grated on me. Thomas, I'm 68, not 88. I don't need supervision to make decisions about my own life. That's not... I didn't mean... He sighed. Mom, I'm worried about you. First the thing with the dollhouse, now this sudden move. It's not like you to be so impulsive. Maybe you don't know what I'm like anymore, I said quietly. We hardly talk these days, and when we do, it's always on Rebecca's terms, always working, around her rules about when I can see the children, if I can see them at all. That's not fair, he said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time I saw Emma and James? When was the last time you brought them to visit me without Rebecca orchestrating every minute, watching me like I might somehow damage them? She's just protective. No, Thomas, she's controlling. There's a difference. And you've allowed it, encouraged it even, by never standing up for me. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said to each other. I don't want to fight with you, he finally said. I love you, Mom. I want you in our lives. Do you? Because sometimes it feels like you've chosen a simpler path, keeping Rebecca happy at all costs, even if it means pushing me to the margins of your life. Another long silence. Then, in a smaller voice than I'd heard from him since childhood. I don't know how to fix this. You start by acknowledging there's something to fix, I said gently. And then we go from there. After we hung up, I felt lighter somehow, as if speaking these truths had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for years. Whether it changed anything remained to be seen, but at least I'd finally given voice to my hurt. The next day, I met with Larry, the contractor, at 542 Maple Street. As we walked through the house, I shared my vision, updating the kitchen while preserving its vintage charm, refinishing the hardwood floors hidden under worn carpeting, painting the rooms in warm, welcoming colors. This is going to be gorgeous when we're done, Larry said, making notes. How soon do you want to start? Immediately, I replied. I'd like to move in next month if possible. Tight timeline, but we can make it work. He looked up from his notebook. This is a change for you, isn't it? Different style than your current place. I smiled. I'm making a lot of changes lately. Later that afternoon, I visited my local bank to arrange financing for the renovations. As I sat in the manager's office discussing terms, I glimpsed a familiar figure through the glass partition. Rebecca, dressed impeccably as always, her expression tense as she spoke with another bank employee. I instinctively shrank back, not wanting her to see me, then immediately felt annoyed with myself for the reaction. Why should I hide? I wasn't doing anything wrong. Our eyes met as she turned to leave. For a moment, she looked startled, then quickly composed her features into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret, what a surprise, she said, approaching my table with rehearsed grace. Banking errands? Something like that, I replied neutrally. How are the children? Wonderful. Emma's been asking about the dollhouse you gave her. It's quite elaborate. I'm glad she likes it. An awkward silence fell between us. Rebecca shifted her weight, clutching her designer handbag. Thomas mentioned, You're thinking of moving? Not thinking, I corrected. Doing. I'll be in my new place next month. That's sudden. Where to, if you don't mind my asking? I met her gaze steadily. Somewhere that feels like home. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, I'm sure Thomas will want all the details. Perhaps you could come for dinner next week. The children would love to see you." The abrupt shift in her attitude, from months of exclusion to a casual dinner invitation, sent a clear message. Thomas had confronted her after our conversation, and she was making a strategic retreat. "I'd love to see the children," I said carefully. "But I'm quite busy with moving preparations. Maybe we could arrange something else? Perhaps I could take Emma and James to the park on Saturday? Just the three of us?" The flicker of panic in her eyes was almost comical. "Oh, I don't know about that. They're so young, and James still naps, and Emma has swim lessons." "Another time, then," I said pleasantly, gathering my papers. "Do give them my love." As I walked to my car, I felt Rebecca's eyes following me. For the first time in our relationship, I'd set terms she couldn't control, and her discomfort was palpable. It was a small victory, but it fueled my resolve to keep moving forward with my plan. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I sorted through decades of possessions, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to store. Claire helped when she could, as did my youngest daughter Sarah, who drove up from Richmond for a weekend. Thomas called several times, each conversation slightly less strained than the last, though we carefully avoided discussing Rebecca or my mysterious new home. One evening, as I packed books in the study, I came across Edward's old journal. I sat on the floor, surrounded by half-filled boxes, and opened it to a random page. His familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes. "Margaret amazes me," he'd written. "After all these years, she still puts everyone else first. Me, the children, her volunteer work. Sometimes I worry she's lost sight of herself in the process. I wish she could see her own strength the way I do." I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. "I'm seeing it now, Ed," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm finally seeing it now." The morning I closed on my current house, I felt a momentary panic. Was I making a terrible mistake? Burning bridges with my son and his family? But as I handed over the keys to the young couple who'd bought it, expecting their first child, so full of hope for their future in this space, I knew I was doing the right thing. That afternoon, I drove to 542 Maple Street, my new home. The renovations were nearly complete, transforming the once-tired Victorian into a warm, inviting space that felt both fresh and comfortingly familiar. I'd incorporated small touches from my old life: Edward's reading chair by the bay window, the antique side table that had been my mother's, the quilt my grandmother had made displayed on a wall rather than hidden in a linen closet. Standing in the front hall, keys in hand, I felt a sense of exhilaration. This house represented more than just a change of address. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I still mattered, that my life wasn't over just because my role as wife and active mother had ended. My phone buzzed with a text. From Larry. "Final inspection passed. Congratulations on your new home." As I began the process of unpacking and settling in, I realized something had shifted inside me. The hurt and resentment that had driven my initial decision hadn't disappeared, but they'd been joined by something else. A genuine excitement about this new chapter, regardless of how the situation with Thomas and Rebecca resolved. For the first time in years, I was living on my terms. And it felt like freedom. My first morning in the Victorian, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to hang curtains on. For a moment, I felt disoriented. The unfamiliar ceiling, the different angle of light, the distant sound of children playing that hadn't been part of my old neighborhood's morning soundtrack. Then it all came rushing back. This was my home now, my fresh start. I padded downstairs in my slippers, enjoying the creak of the original hardwood stairs beneath my feet. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances, but I'd kept the vintage feel with butcher block countertops and glass-fronted cabinets. My coffee maker, the one luxury I'd unpacked immediately yesterday, sat ready on the counter. As the rich aroma filled the kitchen, I carried my mug to the back porch and surveyed my new garden. It needed work. The previous tenants had maintained the basics, but the carefully planned flower beds Edward had designed years ago had become overgrown, the trellises sagging under the weight of untrimmed climbing roses. Yet even in its neglected state, I could see its potential, just as I was beginning to see my own. Well, look who's finally moved in. I turned to find an elderly woman peering over the picket fence that separated our properties. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and despite the early hour, she was impeccably dressed in linen slacks and a bright coral blouse. "I'm Harriet Abernathy," she announced, unlatching the gate and marching into my yard without waiting for an invitation. "I've lived next door for 43 years. Watched this house change hands 6 times. She looked me up and down appraisingly. "You're the owner? Not just another renter?" "Yes, Good. This place needs someone who cares about it. Beautiful bones, but that last family." She made a dismissive gesture. 2 teenagers who thought the garden was their personal skateboard park nearly destroyed Edward's roses. I nearly spilled my coffee. "Edward's roses? You knew my husband?" Harriet's eyebrows shot up. "Your husband? You're Edward Williams' wife?" She squinted at me more closely. "Well, I'll be damned. Margaret, isn't it? He used to talk about you whenever he came to check on the place. Always said you had a better eye for gardens than he did." I sank into one of the wicker chairs on the porch, stunned. "You knew we owned this house? All these years?" "Of course," Harriet said, making herself comfortable in the chair beside mine. "Edward and I would have coffee right here on this porch, every few months. He was so proud of this property, said it was an investment for your future." She paused, her expression softening. "I was sorry to hear about his passing. He was a good man." "Yes, he was," I said quietly. "So?" Harriet leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "Why now? Why move here after all these years of renting it out?" I hesitated, not ready to share the full story with this stranger. It felt like time for a change. Harriet didn't look convinced but didn't press further. Instead, she gestured toward the garden. "Those peonies need dividing if they're going to bloom properly next year. I've got some gardening tools you can borrow until you get your own." Without waiting for a response, she was up and heading back toward her house. "Come over for cocktails. At 5. I want to hear all about what you're planning to do with the place." Before I could protest, she was gone, leaving me laughing softly at her whirlwind presence. It had been years since someone had simply assumed I'd want to socialize, without the complications of family dynamics or the need to work around Rebecca's schedule. It felt refreshingly simple. After breakfast, I drove to the local garden center. If I was going to restore Edward's garden, I needed proper tools and plants. As I wandered through aisles of perennials, I found myself drawn to bold colors and varieties I'd never considered before. Not just the safe, traditional flowers I'd always planted, but exotic-looking blooms with dramatic shapes and vibrant hues. "First-time gardener?" asked an employee, noticing my overflowing cart. "Hardly," I replied with a smile. "Just my first garden that's truly mine." By the time I returned home, my car was filled with plants, tools, and bags of mulch. I changed into old jeans and a faded t-shirt, pulled on gardening gloves, and set to work. There was something deeply satisfying about digging in the earth, clearing away weeds, making space for new growth. I lost track of time, focused only on the rhythm of my hands working the soil. "You've got dirt on your nose." I looked up, startled, to find Thomas standing at the garden gate, a takeout coffee tray in his hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I hadn't told him my new address yet, though I'd planned to once I was properly settled. "How did you find me?" I asked, sitting back on my heels. "Sarah," he admitted. "She didn't want to tell me at first, said I should wait until you were ready. But I convinced her I just wanted to check that you were okay." He held up the coffee tray. "Peace offering?" I peeled off my gloves and stood, suddenly aware of my disheveled appearance. dirt-streaked clothes, hair escaping from its hasty ponytail. I'm not exactly prepared for visitors. Mom, Thomas said softly. It's just me. Something in his tone, a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, made me relent. Come in then, but mind your shoes on the new floors. Inside, Thomas looked around with undisguised curiosity, taking in the high ceilings, the refinished wood, floors, the way sunlight played through the stained glass accents in the front windows. This is not what I expected, he said finally. It's beautiful. Thank you. I accepted the coffee he offered and led him to the kitchen. It's a work in progress, but it already feels like home. Thomas sat at the new kitchen island, turning, his coffee cup in his hands. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. About what you said regarding Rebecca, and how I've let her control the situation with you and the kids. He looked up, his expression troubled. You were right. I've taken the path of least resistance, and it wasn't fair to you. I sipped my coffee, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a carefully prepared speech. I talked to Rebecca, he continued. Really talked to her, not just went along with what she wanted. It didn't go well at first. She accused me of undermining her. Parenting decisions said I was choosing you over her, he sighed. But eventually we got to what I think is the real issue. She's insecure about her relationship with the children. She thinks they'll love you more, or that you'll judge her parenting. I know, he said quickly. But that's how she feels. And I haven't helped by never addressing it directly. He set his cup down decisively. Anyway, we've agreed to start with small steps. Sunday dinners at our house once a month with you as our guest. No supervision, no arbitrary rules, just family time. I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. And Rebecca is on board with this? She's accepting it, Thomas said carefully. It's a start, Mom. Will you come? I thought about it, weighing the genuine progress against my recent resolve not to be manipulated anymore. Yes, I said finally. I'll come. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was a month ago. I won't go back to accepting scraps of time with my grandchildren or being treated like an inconvenience. I know, he said, looking around the kitchen. This whole thing, you moving, standing up to us, it's been a wake-up call. He hesitated, then asked, Can I see the rest of the house? I showed him through the rooms, watching his expression as he took in the changes I'd made. The study with Edward's desk positioned to catch the morning light. The guest bedroom I'd set up specifically with Emma and James in mind, complete with child-sized furniture and shelves stocked with books and toys. You did all this for them? Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Even not knowing if... They're my grandchildren, I said simply. I'll always be ready for them, whether Rebecca allows me to see them or not. When we reached the front parlor, Thomas stopped abruptly, staring at the bay window that overlooked the street. Wait a minute. This view... He moved closer to the window, looking out at the distinctive oak tree on the corner. Mom, what street is this? My heart began to race. This was the moment I'd both anticipated and dreaded. Maple Street, I said carefully. 542 Maple Street. Thomas turned to me slowly, disbelief spreading across his features. This is the house, the one Rebecca and I tried to buy, the one that was suddenly pulled off the market. I met his gaze steadily. Yes? But how? Why? His expression cycled rapidly through confusion, shock, and then understanding. The property management company, EJ Investments, Edward James, Dad's initials. He sank onto the window seat staring at me. You and Dad owned this house all along? And you didn't tell me when you knew we wanted to buy it? I didn't know. At first, I explained, sitting beside him. I only found out when I saw Rebecca's post about your dream house and realized it was our rental property. By then, I trailed off, not wanting to revisit the hurt that had motivated my initial decision. By then, you were angry with us, Thomas finished. With me. Not just angry, I corrected. Hurt, excluded, made to feel insignificant in my own family. I touched his hand gently. I admit, part of me enjoyed the idea of Rebecca finding out who really owned her dream house. But it was more than that. This place represents a fresh start for me, a way to reclaim my life on my own terms. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing. Does Rebecca know? Not yet. She'll be... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. Actually, I don't know how she'll react. This might complicate the progress we've made. Or it might help her see me differently, I suggested. Not as just your mother or the children's grandmother, but as a person with my own history, my own agency. When are you planning to tell her? I considered the question. My initial impulse for dramatic revelation had faded as I'd settled into my new home, replaced by a more measured desire for honest reconciliation. I thought perhaps you could bring her and the children for a visit. Let her see the house, how I've prepared it for all of you. Then we can tell her together. Thomas nodded slowly. That might work. But Mom... He looked at me directly. No matter how she reacts, I want you to know I'm committed to changing things between us. This isn't conditional on Rebecca's approval. Anymore. Something tight in my chest loosened at his words. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly seeing my son. Not the conflict-avoidant man who'd let his wife dictate our relationship, but the thoughtful, caring person I'd raised. Thank you, I said simply. After Thomas left, promising to arrange a family visit soon, I returned to my gardening with renewed energy. As the afternoon sun began to wane, I remembered Harriet's invitation for cocktails. I showered quickly and changed into a casual dress I'd never have worn in my old life, a vibrant blue with an asymmetrical hemline that Sarah had given me last Christmas. It's so not you, Mom, she'd teased, but maybe it should be. Harriet's house was a mirror image of mine in structure but completely different in style. Bold colors, eclectic art, furniture that looked collected rather than matching. You clean up nicely, she commented, handing me a perfectly mixed gin and tonic. Now sit and tell me what brought you to Maple Street, and don't give me that time for a change nonsense. No one uproots their entire life at our age without a good reason. Perhaps it was the gin, or perhaps it was simply the relief of talking to someone with no stake in my family drama. But I found myself telling Harriet everything. The years of increasing isolation from my grandchildren, Rebecca's controlling behavior, Thomas's passive acceptance, and finally, the ironic twist of discovering I owned their dream house. Well, Harriet said when I finished, refilling our glasses. And here I thought my property dispute with the condo association was exciting. She leaned forward, eyes sparkling. So when does the daughter-in-law find out? Soon, I hope. Thomas is going to bring them all for a visit. I want a front row seat for that revelation, Harriet declared. I'll bake my famous lemon bars as an excuse to drop by. We spent the next 2 hours sharing stories, laughing more than I had in years. Harriet, I learned, had been a professor of art history before retiring, had never married, too many interesting men to settle for just one, and had traveled to every continent, including Antarctica. That's my next chapter, she announced. My niece is a marine biologist heading a research expedition to study emperor penguins. I'm joining her team as the expedition photographer. At your age? I asked, then immediately regretted the ageist implication. Harriet just laughed. Darling, age is just a number some frightened clerk assigned us. The real question is what stories you want to collect before you're done. She studied me over her glass. And it seems to me you're just starting to collect some good ones. Walking home under a sky dusted with early stars, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. My garden was waiting for me. My new home was taking shape around me. And for the first time in years, I had a friend who saw me as I was now, not as an extension of roles I'd played in the past. Tomorrow, I would continue bringing my garden back to life. I would hang the curtains I'd selected for the front windows. I would prepare for the possibility of my grandchildren running through these rooms, their laughter filling spaces that had been silent too long. And when Rebecca finally learned the truth about this house, about me, I would face that moment not with vindictive triumph, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally learned to stand in her own power. As Harriet had said, I was just beginning to collect some good stories, and this one was far from over. The promised Sunday dinner almost didn't happen. 2 days before, Thomas called, his voice tight with tension. "Mom, there's been a complication. Rebecca found your address." My hand froze in the act of repotting an orchid. "How?" "She was going through some paperwork in my office and saw the coffee receipt from when I visited you. The address was printed on it." He lowered his voice, though I doubted Rebecca was nearby. She recognized the street immediately and started asking questions. I didn't confirm anything, but she's suspicious. A mixture of anxiety and relief washed over me. Part of me had been dreading the dramatic revelation, while another part wanted everything in the open at last. "What does she suspect exactly?" I asked. "She thinks it's a bizarre coincidence that you moved to the same street as our dream house. She's been driving by, trying to figure out which house is yours." His voice grew even quieter. "She doesn't know the number yet." "I see." I wiped soil from my hands, considering. "Perhaps it's time to accelerate our plan. Why don't you bring Rebecca and the children here tomorrow, instead of me coming to your house Sunday?" "I don't know if she'll agree to that." "Tell her I have something important to share with both of you, something that might change how she sees our family situation." "That sounds ominous, Mom." "It's not meant to be, but we can't keep tiptoeing around this forever." After we hung up, I called Harriet. "The confrontation's happening tomorrow," I told her. "Any advice?" "Wear that blue dress," she said promptly. "And don't lose your temper no matter what she says. The minute you show anger, you've lost the high ground." I spent the rest of the day preparing, not just cleaning the house and baking cookies for the children, but mentally rehearsing what I would say to Rebecca, how I would explain my decision without sounding vindictive, how I would make clear that this house wasn't leverage, but a new beginning. That evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Rebecca standing alone on my porch, her expression a complex mixture of anger and curiosity. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, looking past me into the hallway. "May I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, my heart hammering. This wasn't how I'd planned the revelation, but perhaps it was better this way. Just the two of us, without Thomas or the children as audience or buffer. Rebecca walked slowly through my front rooms, taking in every detail with a critical eye. I followed, watching her recognize elements she'd probably seen in the real estate listing photos. The distinctive stained glass, the ornate fireplace mantel, the unique layout. When she reached the bay window in the front parlor, she stopped abruptly, just as Thomas had. "This is it, isn't it?" she said, her voice eerily calm. 542 Maple Street. Our house. "My house," I corrected gently. "Though I hadn't realized. You and Thomas were interested in it until after you'd already made your offer." She turned to face me, eyes narrowed. "And you expect me to believe that? That it's pure coincidence you own the exact house we were trying to buy?" "Not coincidence. No. Edward and I purchased this property 15 years ago as an investment. We used his initials for the holding company. The management company listed it without consulting me first when the tenants gave notice." Rebecca's perfect composure slipped, just slightly. So, when we found our dream home, made plans for our future, started imagining our children growing up here, you knew all along it would never happen? No, I said firmly. I had no idea you were interested in this house until I saw your social media post about it. By then, I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. By then you'd decided to punish us, Rebecca finished coldly. By then I'd decided to reclaim my life, I countered. Rebecca, for 3 years I've watched you systematically cut me out of my grandchildren's lives. I've bent over backwards to accommodate your rules, your schedules, your arbitrary restrictions on when and how I could see Emma and James. And through it all, Thomas stood by and let it happen. Something flickered in her expression. Guilt, perhaps, or simple discomfort at having her behavior named so directly. You don't understand what it's like, she said, her voice dropping. Having in-laws constantly judging your parenting, your housekeeping, your marriage. I've never judged you. You didn't have to say anything. Every time you brought homemade food, every time you stepped in to comfort Emma when she was crying, every time you showed up with those perfect, thoughtful gifts, it was like a silent rebuke. Look what a better mother, a better woman I am than you. I stared at her, genuinely shocked. That was never my intention. I was just trying to help, to be part of their lives. Well, it felt like criticism, Rebecca insisted, though some of the fire had gone out of her voice. She sank onto the window seat, looking suddenly exhausted. When I saw this house, it felt like a fresh start. Somewhere that would be completely ours, with no history, no comparisons. I sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. And now you've discovered it has a history after all. My history. Edward's history. She nodded, not looking at me. Rebecca, I said quietly, I didn't move here to spite you, though I admit the irony wasn't lost on me. I moved here because at 68, I finally realized I needed a life of my own. Not just as a mother or grandmother or widow, but as Margaret, a woman with her own dreams, her own space. She glanced at me sideways, something almost like curiosity in her expression. I never thought of you that way, she admitted, as a person separate from your relationship to Thomas. Few people do at my age. We become defined by our roles, our relationships to others. But we're still whole people, with desires and disappointments just like anyone else. Rebecca was silent for a long moment, looking around the room. You've made it beautiful, she finally said. Different than I would have, but beautiful. Thank you. The children would love it here. The admission seemed to cost her something. They're welcome anytime, I said carefully. With proper supervision, of course. I allowed myself a small smile. The corner of her mouth twitched in response, almost a smile of her own. Thomas doesn't know you're telling me this, does he? No. He wanted us to break it to you together, gently, but I've found that sometimes the Band-Aid approach is best. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. I need time to process this, to decide what it means for our family. I understand. I walked her to the door, feeling an unexpected sense of accomplishment. We hadn't resolved everything, far from it, but we'd had our first honest conversation in years. It was a start. As Rebecca reached for the doorknob, she turned back. Thomas said you've invited us all over tomorrow. Yes, the children haven't seen my new home yet. She nodded, her expression unreadable. We'll be here at noon. Emma likes peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off. James is allergic to strawberries. After she left, I called Thomas. Rebecca was just here, I told him. I know, he sighed. She took my car without telling me where she was going. Then she came home and locked herself in our bedroom. What happened? What did you tell her? The truth. All of it. And we're still scheduled for tomorrow at noon. Peanut butter sandwiches for Emma, no strawberries for James. His relief was palpable even through the phone. Really? She's okay with it? I wouldn't say okay, exactly. But she's thinking. And that's progress. That night, I slept fitfully, replaying my conversation with Rebecca and imagining scenarios for tomorrow's visit. Would she be cold and formal, merely tolerating my presence? Would she find some excuse to cut the visit short? Or would there be genuine progress toward healing our fractured family? At 6 a.m, unable to sleep any longer, I went down to the garden. The dawn light cast a silvery glow over the flowers I'd planted, the weeds I'd cleared, the pathways I'd begun to restore. In just a short time, this neglected space had begun to transform, just as I had. "Quite the little metaphor you've got growing there," came Harriet's voice from over the fence. She stood in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. "Nervous about the big summit today?" "Terrified," I admitted. "But hopeful, too." "Want a shot of bourbon in your coffee? Dutch courage for the maternal trenches?" I laughed. "It's not even 7 in the morning. Details, details." She waved a dismissive hand. "Well, if you change your mind, my door's open, and I'll have the lemon bars ready by 11:30. As I returned to my gardening, I realized the knot of anxiety in my chest had loosened slightly. Whatever happened today, I had created something here, not just a home or a garden, but a life. A life that included family, I hoped, but wasn't defined solely by my role within that family. For the first time, I felt truly ready to face Rebecca, not as an adversary or a supplicant, but as an equal. Two women with different perspectives but a shared love for the same children, the same man, and perhaps, if we were very lucky, a shared future in this house that had brought us together in such an unexpected way. At precisely 11:28, Harriet appeared, at my back door with a plate of lemon bars, dressed in what appeared to be her Sunday best, a vibrant emerald pantsuit with a silk scarf artfully draped around her neck. "You're not being subtle," I noted, accepting the plate. "Subtlety is for the young," she replied with a dismissive wave. "They have time to waste on it. At our age, it's better to be direct." She peered around my kitchen. "Everything ready for the royal visit?" I'd spent the morning preparing. Peanut butter sandwiches with crusts removed for Emma. Turkey and cheese for James, cut into dinosaur shapes using cookie cutters I'd found at a specialty shop. A fruit platter carefully arranged to avoid any strawberries. Freshly baked cookies cooling on the rack. And in the backyard, a surprise I hoped would delight them both. A wooden swing set I'd had installed 2 days earlier. "As ready as I'll ever be," I told Harriet. Though I'm not sure what to expect after yesterday's conversation with Rebecca. "Expect the unexpected," Harriet advised sagely. "And remember, you hold the deed to this house, but that's not where your real power comes from." She tapped my chest. "It's this. Your willingness to stand up for yourself while still leaving room for reconciliation. That's the balance most people never manage." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Harriet grinned. "That's my cue to disappear. I'll be in my garden if you need reinforcements." She slipped out the back door as I went to answer the front. There they stood, my family, together on my doorstep for the first time. Thomas looked nervous, his eyes darting between Rebecca and me as if anticipating conflict. Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral, though I detected a hint of the vulnerability she'd shown yesterday. But it was Emma and James who captured my attention, Emma bouncing with excitement, James half hidden behind his mother's legs, peering up at me with curious eyes. "Grandma!" Emma launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Daddy said you have a new house with a secret garden." I hugged her back, savoring the contact I'd been denied for so long. "It's not exactly secret, but it is special. Would you like to see it?" She nodded enthusiastically, already tugging me toward the interior of the house. James remained firmly attached to Rebecca, but his eyes were wide with interest as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's beautiful," Thomas said, genuine appreciation in his voice as they followed me inside. "You've really made it your own." Rebecca said nothing, but I caught her studying the changes I'd made to the spaces she'd once imagined filling with her own family's life. The tension between us was palpable, but different than before. Less hostile, more uncertain. I showed them through the house, watching Emma's delight as she discovered the children's books I'd placed on low shelves in the living room. The art. Supplies arranged in colorful jars in what had become my studio. The child-sized table and chairs in a sunny corner of the kitchen. "Can I color here?" she asked, already settling herself at the small table. "Of course," I said, pulling out a drawer filled with paper and new crayons. "I set this up especially for you and James." James, still clinging to Rebecca's hand, looked torn between caution and interest. I knelt to his level, not approaching too closely. "I have something else to show you both," I told him. "Outside in the garden. Would you like to see?" His small nod was barely perceptible, but it was enough. We moved through the French doors onto the back patio, where the swing set stood, simple but sturdy, with 2 swings, a slide, and a small climbing area with a telescope at the top. Emma squealed with delight and raced toward it. James looked up at Rebecca, seeking permission. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, and he broke away, following his sister more cautiously but with growing excitement. As the children played, the 3 adults stood awkwardly on the patio. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, you didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," I said simply. "They're my grandchildren. This is their home too, if you'll let it be." Rebecca's gaze fixed on her children, now both laughing as they took turns going down the slide. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," she said quietly. "For children you barely know anymore." The words stung, but I recognized them as truth, not attack. "I know them in my heart," I replied. "And I'd like the chance to know them in reality. Who they're becoming, what they love, what makes them uniquely themselves." Thomas placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder, a silent question in the gesture. She covered his hand with her own, but addressed me directly. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she said. "About what you said regarding being seen as a complete person, not just a role." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I never considered that you might feel the same invisibility I've sometimes felt as a mother and wife. I hadn't expected this opening, this acknowledgement of shared experience." "It happens gradually," I said. "First, you're a person with roles. Mother, wife, daughter. Then somehow you become the role itself in people's eyes. Just Thomas's mother or the grandmother." Rebecca nodded, her gaze returning to the children. "It was different for me. I went from promising young architect to Emma's mom overnight. My identity disappeared so suddenly I couldn't breathe sometimes." "You never mentioned that," Thomas said, looking surprised. "What was I supposed to say? That I resented our beautiful baby for erasing me? That every time your mother stepped in so effortlessly, knowing exactly what to do when I was struggling, it felt like confirmation that I wasn't cut out for motherhood?" Felt a pang of realization. All those times I'd thought I was helping, I'd actually been undermining her confidence, her sense of competence in her most vulnerable new role. "Rebecca," I said gently, "I never meant to make you feel inadequate. I was trying to help, to be useful. I know that. Now." She sighed, but at the time it felt like criticism, like I couldn't measure up to the perfect mother and grandmother. "You seem to be." Thomas looked between us, clearly processing this new perspective. "I had no idea either of you felt this way." "We never told you," Rebecca and I said simultaneously, then shared a startled glance that melted into reluctant smiles. The ice broken, we moved to the patio furniture where I'd set out lemonade and Harriet's lemon bars. As the children played, we began a halting but honest conversation about the past 3 years. the hurts, the misunderstandings, the assumptions that had driven us apart. "When I saw you'd moved into this house," Rebecca admitted, "my first thought was that you'd done it deliberately to hurt us, to show your power." "That wasn't it," I assured her, though I won't pretend I didn't see the irony. This house represented a fresh start for me, a place that was mine, that I'd chosen, not just somewhere I ended up by default, like I chose motherhood, Rebecca said thoughtfully, even though it sometimes feels like it chose me. I nodded, understanding flowing between us. Exactly. By the time lunch was served, the atmosphere had transformed. Not completely. There were still moments of tension, old habits of defensiveness that flared briefly before being consciously set aside. But something fundamental had shifted. We were seeing each other as whole people, not just as the roles we occupied in relation to each other. After lunch, James fell asleep on the window seat, his small body curled around a stuffed elephant I'd placed there. Emma asked to see the rest of the garden, and I showed her the peonies I'd been dividing, letting her help plant some of the divisions in a sunny spot. "Can I come back and see when they bloom?" she asked, patting the soil around a root ball. "I hope so," I said, glancing toward the house where Thomas and Rebecca were deep in conversation on the patio. "I'd like that very much." When it was time for them to leave, Emma hugged me fiercely. "I miss you, Grandma," she whispered. "Can we come again tomorrow?" Rebecca overheard and answered before I could. "Not tomorrow, sweetheart. Grandma needs time to rest. But..." She looked at me with a new openness in her expression. "How about next Saturday? We could make it a regular thing if Grandma wants." "I'd love that," I said, emotion tightening my throat. After they drove away, I stood on my porch watching until their car disappeared around the corner. The visit had gone better than I'd dared hope, though I knew we had a long way to go. One successful afternoon couldn't erase years of hurt and mistrust. But it was a beginning, fragile and tentative, but real. Harriet appeared as if by magic, settling beside me on the porch swing. "Well, how was the royal visit?" I recounted the day's events, the unexpected breakthrough with Rebecca, the joy of reconnecting with my grandchildren. "So the house worked its magic," Harriet observed. "Not exactly," I corrected. "It wasn't the house itself that changed things. It was what the house represented. My willingness to finally stand up for myself, to create a life that wasn't defined solely by my relationship to them." Harriet nodded approvingly. "Independence is attractive. It draws people to you rather than pushing them away. That's something most folks never figure out." She patted my knee. "You're going to be just fine, Margaret Williams, with or without the family drama." As twilight settled over my garden, I realized Harriet was right. The past month had transformed me. I had built a new life, one that had room for family, certainly, but didn't depend on them for meaning or purpose. I had my garden, my art studio where I'd begun painting again after decades away from the easel, my friendship with Harriet, my plans to volunteer at the local library's children's program, and if Rebecca and Thomas and the children became a regular, part of that life, as I fervently hoped they would, it would be because we'd chosen each other as equals, not because of obligation or guilt or manipulation. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started keeping since moving to Maple Street. "Today," I wrote, "I finally understood what Edward meant when he used to say that the best gifts can't be held in your hands. They can only be held in your heart. Today, I held my grandchildren again, and for the first time in years, I think they truly saw me, not just as their grandmother but as Margaret, a woman with a story all her own." 3 months after that first family visit, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday lunch, the windows open to catch the early autumn breeze. My hands moved with practiced ease, chopping vegetables for a salad while a roast chicken filled the sar. House with its savory aroma. From the backyard came the sound of laughter, Emma's high, clear giggles and Thomas's deeper chuckle as they harvested the last tomatoes from the garden beds we'd planted together. "Need any help?" Rebecca appeared in the doorway, James balanced on her hip. In his hands, he clutched a slightly mangled bouquet of marigolds, his contribution from the garden. "You could set the table if you don't mind," I suggested. "James, those flowers are beautiful. Shall we put them in a special vase?" He nodded solemnly, extending his small fist to offer me the blooms. As I arranged them in a cobalt blue vase, one I'd made myself in the pottery class I'd started taking at the community center, I marveled at how much had changed since that tense first visit. We hadn't become the perfect family overnight. There had been setbacks, moments of old resentments flaring up, times when Rebecca's insecurities or my stubborn pride threatened to undo our fragile progress. But we kept trying, kept talking, kept showing up. Not just for the children, but for ourselves, for the relationships we were slowly rebuilding. The weekly Saturday visits had evolved into a comfortable routine. Sometimes we'd stay at my house, the children playing in the garden or helping me bake cookies in the kitchen. Other times, I'd join them at their home for movie nights or board games. Thomas had even begun dropping the children off for occasional sleepovers, allowing Rebecca and him rare date nights, something they hadn't enjoyed since Emma was born. "I like your hair," Rebecca commented as she arranged plates on the table. "The shorter style suits you." I touched my newly cropped silver, bobbed self-consciously. After decades of the same shoulder-length style, I'd finally taken Harriet's advice and embraced a more modern look. "Thanks. Harriet's hairdresser suggested it." "How is Harriet? Still planning that Antarctica trip?" "Leaves next month." "She's been shopping for extreme weather gear for weeks. Says she's going to be the most fashionable person on the ice." Rebecca smiled, adjusting a fork. "I've been meaning to ask her about the renovation she did on her kitchen. The subway tile is exactly what I've been thinking about for our bathroom update. This casual exchange would have been unimaginable 3 months ago. Yet here we were, discussing haircuts and home renovations like ordinary family members, perhaps not yet friends, but no longer adversaries. Thomas and Emma burst through the back door, their arms full of tomatoes and zucchini, faces flushed. "From the garden." "Final harvest of the season," Thomas announced proudly. "Emma's quite the gardener, Mom. Takes after you." "Grandma's teaching me all about plants," Emma informed her mother seriously. "I'm going to have my own garden plot next. Spring, is that so?" Rebecca met my eyes over Emma's head, a question in her expression. I nodded. "If it's all right with you and your dad, of course. I thought we could section off a small area just for Emma. James, too, when he's ready." Rebecca's smile held none of the territorial tension that would have accompanied such a suggestion months ago. "I think that's wonderful. Maybe I could help too. I've always wanted to learn gardening, but our townhouse didn't have much space." "I'd like that," I said sincerely. As we settled around the table for lunch, I observed my family with quiet contentment. James, now comfortable enough to sit in a booster seat next to me instead of clinging to Rebecca. Emma, chattering about her school project and how I'd promised to help her build a model of the solar system. Thomas, relaxed and engaged, no longer walking on eggshells between his mother and wife. And Rebecca, still reserved at times but genuinely trying, bringing a bottle of my favorite wine today, asking about my pottery class, sharing stories about her own mother's gardening disasters. After lunch, as Thomas and Rebecca cleared the dishes despite my protests, Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, can we look at the pictures again? The ones of Daddy when he was little?" I retrieved the photo albums I'd brought from my old house, and we settled on the window seat that had become our special spot. James climbed up too, curling against my side as I opened to pages showing Thomas at Emma's age, gap-toothed and freckled, proudly displaying a model airplane he'd built with Edward. "Daddy looks like me," Emma observed, tracing the photograph with one finger. "He does," I agreed. You have his eyes and his smile. From across the room, I caught Thomas watching us, a complex emotion on his face. Later, as the children napped and Rebecca took a work call in my study, he joined me on the back porch. I've been meaning to talk to you about something, he said, his expression serious. My heart skipped. Had there been some new problem I hadn't detected? Some issue with Rebecca? It's about the house, he continued, or rather about what you've created here. He gestured around at the flourishing garden, the comfortable outdoor space, the home that had become a sanctuary, not just for me, but for all of us. What about it? I've been thinking a lot about what happened, how it all unfolded, how we almost lost you. His voice caught slightly. How I almost lost you because I couldn't see what was happening between you and Rebecca, because I wasn't brave enough to stand up for either of you in the right ways. I touched his hand gently. Thomas. No, let me finish. When Rebecca and I were looking at this house, thinking about buying it, we saw it as an escape. A fresh start away from perceived judgments, away from the past. He looked around thoughtfully. But you've shown us something different. You've made this place about connection. To the past, to each other, to the future through the children. You've created something Rebecca and I never could have. I hadn't expected this insight from my pragmatic son. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying thank you for standing your ground, for not giving up on us even when we gave you every reason to. He smiled ruefully, and for creating this space where we can all be ourselves, not just roles like, you said, but complete people. That evening, as the family prepared to leave, Rebecca hung back while Thomas got the children settled in their car seats. I've been thinking, she said carefully, about Christmas. In previous years, Christmas had been a particular point of contention. Rebecca's family traditions had always taken precedence, with my participation limited to a brief, supervised visit on Christmas Eve. What about it? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I think we should have it here this year, if you're willing. She hurried on before I could respond. There's more space. The children love it here and it feels right somehow. I'd love that, I managed, blinking back unexpected tears. Rebecca nodded, a tentative smile playing at her lips. We could start some new traditions, blend the old ones from both our families. I'd like that very much. After they drove away, I sat on my front porch in the gathering dusk, savoring the quiet and the remarkable turn my life had taken. A car pulled into Harriet's driveway, and she emerged with her usual dramatic flair, laden with shopping bags. Successful family day? She called, crossing to my yard without hesitation. More than I could have imagined, I replied. They want to have Christmas here. Harriet settled beside me, nudging my shoulder companionably. Well, quite the victory lap, Margaret. It doesn't feel like winning, I mused. More like everyone finding their proper place, their true voice. Same thing in my book. She studied me with shrewd eyes. You know, when you first moved in, you were all about that family drama. The house, the daughter-in-law, the estranged grandchildren. Important stuff, certainly. But look at you now. What do you mean? I mean, you've built a life that's about more than just your family relationships. Pottery classes on Wednesdays, volunteering at the library on Thursdays, that painting you're entering in the community art show, the garden restoration project, me dragging you to jazz concerts you pretend not to enjoy. She grinned. You're living, Margaret. Fully living. I considered this, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. I am, aren't I? And that's why they've come around, Harriet continued wisely. Not because you own this house or because you forced the issue, but because you became someone they wanted in their lives, not someone they felt obligated to include. Later that night, I sat at Edward's old desk in my study, a space that had become truly mine over the past months. I opened my journal to a fresh page, pen hovering over the paper as I searched for words to capture the day's significance. Finally, I wrote, "Today I realized something important. When I moved into this house, I thought it was about reclaiming power in my relationship with Thomas and Rebecca, about being seen and respected as the grandmother of Emma and James. But it was never really about the house itself, or even about my role in the family. It was about finding myself again, the Margaret who existed before and beyond all those other identities. In discovering her, I made room for everyone else too." I closed the journal and moved to the window, looking out, at my garden silvered by moonlight. The peonies had long since finished blooming, but the beds were ready for spring, for new growth, for whatever the next season might bring. Like me. At 68, I had finally learned that life doesn't end with widowhood or an empty nest, or even family estrangement. It simply changes, offering new pathways, new connections, new ways of being in the world. I had discovered that standing up for myself didn't have to mean standing alone, that boundaries and bridge building could happen simultaneously, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others is to fully love and honor yourself first. The house on Maple Street had indeed become a dream home, not just for Rebecca and Thomas, who now visited regularly with no hint of envy or resentment, but for me. A dream I hadn't known to dream until life's unexpected turns led me here. And as for my daughter-in-law who once refused to let me see my grandchildren, she would never be the daughter I'd never had, nor I the mother she'd always wanted. But we had found something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect, growing understanding, and the shared love of two children who now moved freely between our worlds, carrying the best of each back and forth like little ambassadors of the heart. Some dreams, it turns out, are better than the ones we originally imagined for ourselves. And some houses become homes in ways no real estate listing could ever describe, measured not in square footage or property values, but in the laughter that fills their rooms, the hard conversations that clear their air, and the love that finally is allowed to grow without constraint or condition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.